Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Jeff Williams and Naomi Buckwalter from Contrast. How you both doing?
Great. Hi, Chris.
Hey, what's up, Chris?
I'm excited to have you on. We had a bit of a false start a couple of weeks back with some technical difficulties. You know, it happens to even the best of us in cybersecurity sometimes, but we are here now.
Just good security, that's all.
Yeah, good endpoint security and good security in general. But so I've known each of you for several years, honestly, and been connected for a long time with each of you. But for folks that don't know, Jeff and Naomi and Contrast, can you tell us a bit about yourself and the team? Maybe starting with you, Naomi.
Oh, okay. Hey guys, I'm Naomi Buckwalter. I'm the Senior Director of Product Security at Contrast. And I've been at Contrast for 3 years, but I've been a fan for much, much longer. I was actually a customer back in like 2019 time. And I've been a follower of Contrast since you guys got started as a company. So always been a fan. I've done AppSec since my start in IT. Actually, I was a developer for quite a number of years. Moved into security. It's been security ever since. I've done security in all different domains, but AppSec's always been my favorite.
Awesome. How about you, Jeff?
Yeah, I've been I don't know. I guess I started hacking in high school, so like the mid '80s, and I didn't intend to get into software or security, but it accidentally came back. I started working on a high assurance project for the government and really got into security then. And then the internet happened. I started doing a lot of security consulting. I helped to start OWASP, and I did a lot of consulting for really big companies, including Naomi's former company.
Mm-hmm.
And then had this epiphany about runtime security. And so, we started that and started Contrast, and here we are.
Yeah, the rest is history. I was kind of laughing on mute there because anytime we talk about AppSec, like, your name is kind of synonymous with it. You've been around since I think the phrase has existed. And, you've seen that many evolutions of application security. And as you talked about now, the emphasis around runtime. And we've seen kind of this rise of the phrase of application detection and response, or ADRs, as people are calling it. And some are hearing this, and I'm sure they're thinking, like, is shift left no longer a priority? Why do you think ADR is catching on and runtime is becoming, such an emphasis in the community? And where did shift left go wrong?
Yeah, there have been a lot of different iterations of AppSec. There was like a pen test phase, and then there was a bunch of scanning phases and a static phase and a maturity model phase. And then there was DevSecOps, and then shift left. And I don't know, I feel like a lot of people have tried to take shortcuts with AppSec and, try to do it on the cheap and just, barely get by. And the reason that runtime security works and is different than those other things is it has real runtime context. And so ADR, application detection response, means put sensors in production to watch how applications are actually behaving from inside the apps themselves. And when you get that kind of real context, you can focus on the real attacks, the real vulnerabilities that are not just reachable, but actually being reached in production. And I think that's where people need to start. Like, we talk about a risk-first approach, but if you're just running static tools and dealing with the highs and criticals, you really don't have any idea what's real. Like, that could be completely wrong because you don't have enough context to tell whether they're high and critical, or that all your lows and mediums aren't high and critical.
Yeah, you and I actually had a deep dive on this about shift left, and I can't remember if it was live or via a written form in an article. I can't remember. It's been some time, but I feel like shift left intuitively makes sense. But then as you start digging into it, even some of the studies that were cited in terms of the costs and cost reductions of fixing things earlier in the SDLC are debatable or questionable at best, I guess you could say, in terms of the studies that get often cited. And then, as you said, there's been a pivot of focusing on exploitability or reachability and things of that nature. But again, that's in a static context. It's not in a runtime, production environment that's tied to real threats that are being executed. And I think that's contributing to, kind of the rise of this phrase.
That's probably the biggest problem with shift left is it seems like it ought to work. It's like, oh, sure, the Earth is the center of the universe and stuff like that. So easy to believe if you don't really understand what's going on. And, I've just seen company after company put big amounts of dollars behind shift left projects, and then they just end up generating a huge backlog of vulnerabilities that nobody triages, and they don't know which apps they belong to in production, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, agreed. And it's kind of become like us in security beating developers over the head with lengthy spreadsheets of findings, before they can go to production, and then we wonder why they hate us and don't want to work with us and don't want to collaborate with us.
Wait, they hate us? Oh no! This is news.
Well, there is a study from Harvard and I think it's open source foundation that said developers find security a soul withering chore is what they called it. So it doesn't sound like they necessarily love security. I was going to ask you, Naomi, as like a practitioner, a user, and now someone who focuses on product at contrast, where have you seen kind of shift left, go off the rails or become problematic or challenging for organizations?
I mean, no one's ever said they straight up hate us, but yeah, I mean, the undertone is there, I think. Yeah, and I could see that. Where have we gone wrong? Well, it's all about context. Jeff mentioned this. If your tools don't know what the heck is actually happening under the hood, of course it's going to pop a message every time or an alert and say, this is a problem. It's even on the other side. So in the practitioner side, sometimes I don't see all the layers of controls that go around something. So even if I say there might be a broken access control somewhere in the code, someone else might say, but we have this other control going on and other layers happening, and I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't know about that, right? So it's a lot of context missing in a lot of the conversations that you have with developers, and then also the tools are missing the context. It's really all about like seeing the bigger picture. So when we say where shift left has failed, it really is just a communication issue. It's like the tools don't have the context, the developers don't have the context of what security is looking for, security doesn't have the context to what developers know. And there's always this passing of the baton thinking someone else will know what to do. Meanwhile, the baton gets dropped left and right, and oh gosh, everyone's just running in circles at that point.
I think there's this real danger that we're going to fall into the same trap again with AI. And people think AI is going to solve the problem. And there's companies now that are launching, AI-based application security products. But it still comes down to context. And if all you can see is the source code, you don't have any more context. Ultimately, it comes down to what data do you have that's real. And if you get the right data, then maybe AI can make some contributions, but I don't think it's just going to automatically fix the false positive problem. In fact, I think probably the opposite.
Yeah, there's been some interesting, I'm always reading reports from vendors in the industry and research and things like that. And there was one recently on AI and AppSec, and it seems like there's the Spider-Man meme where developers are pointing at security's pointing at developers, and everyone's pointing at the vendor of who's actually responsible for this AI generated code. So I do fear that we're kind of heading in the same direction. And you both talked about context and tools and tech stacks. And, I think part of that is, we've seen the rise of application exploit as a primary attack vector. If you look like M-Trends or DBIR, they're leading reports. But historically, when we look at like SecOps or SOC, for example, they don't have application level context or visibility. It's more endpoint and infrastructure centric, that kind of thing. And when we look at ADR, for example, what do you think the implications of the future of the SOC and SIEM and so on look like, when it comes to ADR and getting that application level context? How's that going to change things? Whoever wants to jump in, go ahead.
Yeah, your wheelhouse. Well, how are we seeing ADR change the modern SOC? So SOC teams typically don't even care about the application layer. I know it sounds deep, but or not real, but when they get application layer traffic, they're like, this looks legitimate. So like even things they put in, so the web application firewalls, and all the different rules that say we're going to block X attack and Y attack. I will tell you this, when I was in the SOC, I put in a WAF and I was deeply terrified of blocking legitimate traffic. So what did I do on the WAF? I let everything through except for like the most obvious attacks, right? So even people with a security mindset like I had at that point, I was still very deathly afraid of breaking anything in the business. And what we're seeing with the SOC today is more of the same, but now with ADR, they can do more insight. So they can be more granular in their rules if they wanted to. With ADR, they can say, yes, this is definitely an issue. We need to block this. Or, hey, we actually see this attack happening. Let's block this. So they actually have more insight and more true positives to work on. They have more confidence in the rules. And as a SOC person, as a previous security operations person, I could say, I wish I had something like this, because instead of just relying on a WAF doing a thing, now I know with ADR, hey, you've got that insight, you've got that context with the application, you know it's a problem, go ahead and block it. We're okay. Everything's good.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the SOC can easily handle application security issues. The things that you do to respond to an application security incident are not that different from what you do to respond to incidents at other levels. You apply a patch, you block an IP address, you turn on a rule. It's not that complicated. And so AppSec historically has just done a terrible job of communicating with the SOC. We don't use the right language. We don't call things incidents. We call them vulnerabilities. We talk about risk rating and not like, is this exploitable? Do we give them a run book? No, we tell them how to remediate. It's just the wrong language that we use. And so, I've spent the last year and a half or 2 years working on that, talking to SOCs, trying to figure out how to communicate with them, tell them when there's an incident and what they need to do to solve it. And if you give the SOC really good information about a real attack that's obviously, not a false positive, they're perfectly happy to deal with that. And they can. It's not that, it's just we burned a lot of bridges by giving them WAFs and saying like, hey, you're on your own. I've talked to hundreds of organizations over the past few years about how they use their WAF. And the answer in almost all of them is it's there. It's probably not blocking. It may not even be really have an effective rule set. And the data that they do collect goes into their SIM and nobody looks at it.
Yeah.
It's just, it's just pure compliance at this point, which
Absolutely.
is disappointing because app incidents are serious. Your apps are like the closest thing to your data. And so we need the SOC to engage, and it's our job to bring them into the fold and get them, DevSec ops, that like a third of it is ops and nobody talks about that. But we got to bridge that gulf because that's where the action is. That's where CISOs fund.
Yeah, it's so funny you said the DevSecOps piece, because as you said it, I was thinking like, for a long time, it was like DevSecOps, but the sec is silent was kind of the joke, or people would make phrases like that. But when it came to ops, runtime, production visibility in terms of application security, that piece was missing from the conversation. And I wanted to ask you, but you talked about the WAF there, for example. Like some may look at the WAF and say, isn't this good enough? Like we're protecting the application layer, but you all have talked about this, you've researched it, and as you said, it's kind of a compliance-driven requirement in some extent. Like, do you have a WAF? Yeah, of course we have one. Okay, but like, is it, is that good enough? And as you're talking about, maybe it helps with DDoS or some other things, but it seems like attackers have figured out ways to bypass it, or teams aren't fully implementing it. Things of that nature. Like, what does the future of the WAF look like in this kind of ADR paradigm? Perhaps start with you on that one, Jeff.
Yeah, so we did a study and we wanted to know, is the WAF actually able to stop application layer attacks? And so, first we tested both WAFs and EDR products, by the way, because people say, oh, I got a WAF, I got an EDR, like I don't need to worry about AppSec, I'll catch it. And the answer is they're not going to. And in fact, if you run an attack directly against an operating system, then something in infrastructure is probably going to catch it. Like the EDR is probably going to see it and like, oh, that's ransomware, I'm going to stop it. But if you run that attack through the application, then EDR doesn't see it. It's like money laundering. Like the attack went through the app and now the app is trusted, so the operating system trusts it. And you can do whatever you want. So we showed pretty effectively that like from almost, for a broad range of attacks, it's invisible to the WAF and it's invisible to EDR, especially when you go through the application layer.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Naomi. We talked about the SOC and how we kind of burned some political capital or trust, with the SOC and SecOps folks in the past. Like from the contrast perspective, the product perspective, it's a bit of a cultural shift. Like getting the SOC and those folks engaged in application level incidents. What does that look like as you guys are going out there engaging with customers, working with the product team on your end? Getting in the right telemetry to them. Is it folks using contrast directly? Is it contrast, funneling some of that telemetry and such to the SOC or SIEM? Like, what does that kind of look like as you go out and implement it?
Yeah, I actually went to the Splunk Conf this year over in Boston, and I spoke to a number of SOC folks who really didn't know anything about their application tech stack. They didn't know anything about it. They just know network traffic, and where that goes, it goes, right? So when I showed them a demo of ADR, their eyes just lit up. You could see like the heavens opening up and the angels singing, and you could just see like, wow, I had no idea. This is so cool. Like this happens on my application servers. This is great. And so when we showed them this, they wanted more. So the way that we move forward here, it's show the SOC what they're missing. It's like, hey, it's not just network traffic. This actually goes somewhere. This does something on your applications. This does something, like this does something. Here's what it is. And then they say, oh, show me this rule or show me this. What happens here? And then you start answering these questions, and then more of the heavens open up and more of the angels start singing. And they say, this is what we've been missing this whole entire time. And to have these conversations, it's not just protecting your applications, it's also protecting the availability of your servers too. Boom. Oh, I want to keep the uptime running to 5,000 nines, whatever it is these days. Like, I want that. Oh, okay. Well, let's talk about that. Like get them talking about what they care about, and then tack on the security, because everyone cares about security. At least they say they do. But in general, they'd be like, we want the business to make money. We want availability. We want all these things. Oh, and by the way, we want to protect our data and our business too.
It's actually, from a cultural perspective, it's exactly the same problem as building trust with developers. We can't give them a huge list of nonsense and then expect them to love AppSec. And so, at contrast, we're trying to focus on the 5% or less of issues that are real. And it's both in production and in development. And in fact, it starts in production, where you see like, hey, this vulnerability that we found, let's add context to it. Let's enrich that finding so that we know exactly what's going on. Is it attached to a critical application? Is it currently discovered by attackers? Is it currently being exploited by attackers? All the things that make it real in production. If we go to development and operations with a vulnerability that's critical, under attack in production, and other factors that we can fill in, they take it seriously. They love that. But when we go to them with a log injection problem that's pretty much unexploitable in any environment, and even if you did exploit it, it wouldn't cause any harm. Like that's just distracting everybody and making folks feel like you're wasting their time. Nobody wants that. So we got to fix that paradigm. Like running a static tool in early development, like shift way left, generating a ton of false positives, and then making developers fix all those things that aren't real is not going to work. It's going to undermine your culture, and it'll end up with much worse security. I would much rather people started with the list of stuff in production that's on fire and fix those problems. And then, how far down that list can you go? Like, that's the way we should work, not, giant pile and randomly choose stuff on the left to fix.
Yeah, I feel like to some extent it's admiring the problem of this utopia type scenario where we're going to fix everything from the onset, but the systems are already running in production. Like there's already problems there. There's already threats being, conducted against these applications. Like we need to start there. And as you point out, all the questions that you were listing there, it really gets down to, does this matter to me? Should I care about this? Yeah. It's like what you're getting down to there. And I think, we hear all the time about cognitive overload of people in the SOC or SecOps or, developer or AppSec practitioners being exponentially outnumbered by developers. Like you're getting down to what should I really care about? What really matters? And that's what we're kind of getting to.
I don't think people are going to give up running static analysis tools early in development. And I think that's fine. Like if developers want to run those and make their code a little better but I feel like the important feedback loop is get context from production and real attacks, real vulnerabilities, and then bring that all the way left and just make that feedback loop really fast. If we can do that and developers can fix the real problems fast, we'll be in a way better situation than taking, industry average, I don't know what it's like, 190 days to fix a vulnerability. Like those timelines are crazy. It's a massive window of exposure. So I want to change the formula. Like let's fix the 5% of things that are really critical and do those real fast. And let developers, if you got best practices and guardrails and all that, to try to minimize those vulnerabilities early, that's fine. But you're really never going to get anywhere close to everything.
Yeah, I feel like the rise of ADR and this emphasis on runtime is kind of a mea culpa of the community or an acknowledgement that like we're not going to fix everything before it goes to production, and we need to recognize, we need to accept that, but we need to observe what is happening in production, and then, as you said, kind of correct those issues, get back to the team. How can we address things that are truly being exploited or attempted to be attacked, and so on? And you actually talked about something I wanted to bring up. You all have a great report called Software Under Siege, and you talk about the disadvantage that the defenders are fighting with. Like, for example, in the report, it talks about 5 days from vulnerability disclosure to exploitation development, 48 minutes from initial exploit to lateral movement. I've even seen some using AI now to develop exploits literally within, I think it's minutes or hours of a CVE being published, for trivial amounts of a few dollars, for example, per exploit development. How does ADR equip defenders kind of mitigate and bolster their advantage when it comes to that challenge? I'd be curious, what you all think about that when we see this kind of asymmetry between attackers and defenders. Maybe start with you on that one, Naomi.
Yeah. So with ADR, of course, you get protection for classes of vulnerabilities, not just specific CVEs. So yeah, it's right. You're right that attackers are using AI to like go through old GitHub repos and be like, what kind of vulnerabilities exist with this code? And, and then they just go to the most popular packages and just start exploiting things. And yes, that's happening. But ADR is right there in production, running next to your code, saying, does this look like a type of vulnerability that I protect against? And, oh, it is? Okay, great, block. So when we're talking about like specific CVEs, it almost doesn't matter who's creating them or vulnerability. It doesn't matter where they're coming from. They're the same type of running code that we've been having. It doesn't matter if it was written faster using AI or found with AI. It's still an exploit. It's still a vulnerability. And if protect and ADR is there to protect against it, boom, it's right there.
I think the trick is protecting against attacks in the right place. So just so everybody understands, when ADR detects an attack, it's not like a WAF. It's not just looking at the HTTP request and going, oh, there's some funny characters in there, so it's probably an attack, and I'll block it. That's how you get false positives, and that's how you break applications. ADR watches that request as it gets processed by the code. It sees a bunch of untrusted data come in, and it watches it flow through the application. And if any of that untrusted data makes it into a SQL query and changes the meaning of that SQL query, that's when ADR flags it and says, hey, that's an attack, because that should never happen. Like, no user data should ever change the meaning of your queries. And so we're not intervening at the perimeter. We're intervening, right before that query goes to the database. We verify that, hey, this thing was not tampered with. And if it was, we block it. So it's a completely different story in terms of false positives than what you get with a WAF.
And I think, Jeff, you want to be clear, there's not just SQL that ADR protects.
Oh, that's a great point. I mean, it's expression language injection, XXE, file traversal, command injection. I mean,
OS injection, yeah.
It's really good at injection kinds of problems because it watches the data as it flows through the application. And injection problems are the exact ones that static tools are really bad at. Mm-hmm. Data flows hard.
Yeah, you actually, as I said, I mentioned that Software Under Siege report. You all provide some excellent insights there in terms of probing and viable attacks that you're kind of observing, and it goes into those type of attack types that you guys just talked about there. So, again, a plug for that report is really excellent in terms of real world insights that you observed across running applications.
I think differentiating between probes and what we call real attacks or viable attacks is really important. It's more than 99% of the attacks are just probes. They never connect with the vulnerability that they're trying to exploit. And so, for the most part, you don't have to worry about them. They're not doing any damage. We want you to focus on the viable attacks, the ones that actually reach the type of vulnerability that they were targeting. And that's when I say, runtime techniques can focus on the small percent of things that really matters. That's what I'm talking about.
And as a practitioner, I would say the probes aren't useless. Like, I actually do like looking at them. You can get a sense of what the attackers are trying to do. So if you see an attacker, and by the way, it makes it really easy to just block them, but you can watch them for a little bit and see what they're doing. It's hilarious. They're trying a whole bunch of different things, like PHP attacks. Like, we don't have PHP here, right? But it's hilarious. Right. So they'll try different things, and you'll see the evolution of what they're trying to do. And it's fascinating to see what an attacker will try. They'll try unsafe deserialization for one, or they'll try OS command injection for another, and they'll just keep trying different things. Bing, 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 bing. A little bit here, a little bit there, trying to go under the radar. Oh, but we see all the probes, we see all your network traffic, categorized by the type of attack that you're trying to do. And it makes it so much easier to respond to in case there is an issue underlying, under the hood. If there is an exploitable vulnerability, ADR is there to help. ADR is there to help.
Yeah, I think it's really excellent that you guys both framed it like that, because it, on one hand, those probes are kind of like a signal, right? It's a threat-informed defense. You can see what are they trying to do? How do I, get a sense of, what the attackers are attempting? But those viable attack paths are, what do I really need to focus on right now? Versus, what should I be thinking about in the future that they're trying at the moment that may not be viable? So that's a really great way to discern between the two. And I wanted to ask you, we brought up AI, of course. No conversation right now would be, complete without a mention of AI. But when you look at the landscape around AppSec, I feel like in security more broadly, like security is typically a laggard, a late adopter, cloud, SaaS, mobile, you name it. Like we're always very risk averse. We tend to be late to adoption. But AI seems to be a little bit different, where I feel like, people are a little bit more willing to lean in and at least experiment, explore. For example, there's been some promising things that Jeff talked about where people are trying to combine SaaS and LLMs to maybe drive down false positives, or people on the SOC and SecOps side are using LLMs to produce more comprehensive investigations and reports of incidents and things of that nature. When you look at the landscape of AppSec and AI, where and how do you guys kind of see it playing a role as we move forward, both from your individual perspectives as well as, from the contrast side as well? Either you can jump in first on that one.
My take is that AI is only going to be as good as the underlying data that you give it. And so I'll just come back to that point. I mentioned it earlier. What we do is we have sensors, sort of across your application landscape, APIs, web apps, and all the infrastructure and so on. And we collect all that telemetry and we build something we call the contrast graph. And it's really a model of your application, your entire application layer. It's a context-rich graph that when we have that, then we can expose AI to that and get some really interesting output. So we use it to generate fixes for vulnerabilities right in the repo so that, developers don't have to futz around with it. We generate, we have all this context, which allows us to generate really good fixes. Like we know all the libraries that you're using in your application. We know what connections are made. We know what other defenses are in place on that route. We even know how you did defenses in other parts of the application so that you can follow the same pattern instead of just applying some generic fix. So I think that's an interesting piece of the puzzle.
I would say I am concerned about one thing when it comes to the future of AppSec and AI. So I'm hearing a lot from just reading articles, but companies are using AI to make decisions for their business, right? So we know this, but even within their products, like an insurance company might say, and they've probably done this, but they'll use AI to like who gets benefits and how much the premiums cost and who gets denied and all these things. But imagine that, but at scale. So now you've got AI in all these different types of products, all these different companies. And now AI being trained on this weird data, where this model is coming from, is making decisions as if the product had done it. So instead of writing in business logic in the product, where a coder will actually be like, if then this, if else this, right? Do this thing, whatever. AI is now doing those things. It's probably going to be harder for AppSec people and just operations people in general to know if that's right. If they'll be like, if this is normal user behavior, if this is normal application behavior, go ahead and accept it. Otherwise, AI is going off the rails a little bit. How do we actually stop this thing? So I think in the future, AI and AppSec is going to have a little bit of a change in relationship. It's like, how do we make sure the application doesn't go off the rails because of AI?
Yeah, it's an interesting problem because if you look at, just bring it back to software development and cybersecurity, like in the age of zero trust, quote unquote, zero trust, studies and research are showing that developers are just implicitly trusting the AI generated code, for example, without any validation or rigor. And that can happen in AppSec too, is like, when it comes to determining something's a false positive or a valid finding that needs to be investigated or maybe blocking or allowing something, those same challenges and risks are inherent there when it comes to us using AI too. I think that's important to Jeff's point of the quality of the data is what's going to inform those decisions, whether semi or fully autonomous type activities. So, we've run the gamut of everything from shift left to traditional SOC and SIEM tooling and gaps around runtime visibility and context, the importance of ADR. I'm curious from both of you, kind of any closing thoughts of ADR and the future of AppSec, and words you want to leave practitioners with as we wrap up. Maybe start with you on this one, Naomi.
Well, let's see. I mean, AI is here to stay. We all know this. And I don't think we should be scared of it, though. I think we should embrace it. And as an AppSec person, if you're not next to your developers learning about what they're doing and how they're using AI, then you're going to be missing a huge piece of the puzzle. So get your head out of the sand, start studying, keep up to date with the latest and greatest with DevOps, or just Dev and Ops.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, AppSec has always been, I kind of think of it as floating up the application stack. Like in the early days, it was, kind of raw HTTP level stuff. And as frameworks evolve and new technologies came out, AppSec keeps kind of floating up as the stuff below it gets more standardized. I wish we'd done better at, stamping out SQL injection or an XSS, but we do have a lot of work to do to get our heads around AI. And I'm proud of what OWASP is doing in that area. The OWASP LLM top 10 is really good. And there's a number of other projects there that are making some really cool advances. But the big thing I wanted to mention, after our conversation, was that I think a lot of people are going to be irritated at this message that you can't secure everything. I often talk to CISOs and others that are really clutching the idea of stamping out all the vulnerabilities really tightly. And it's hard to give up because they're like, if we just worked harder, if our developers, did their job, and I hear stuff like this, which is absurd, by the way. But, I hear this idea that if we just tried harder, we wouldn't be pushing all these vulnerabilities into production. And that's just not reality. There is no try harder. There's no maturity model that's going to process your way out of this. You're going to have to deal with vulnerabilities in production. And so I'm encouraging folks to embrace that and step down from this, this perfect vulnerability management kind of approach to things. If you're just, you're like we solved all the highs and criticals, you're not in a good place. And it's going to be tough for organizations that are like shifted all the way left that way. Like, I don't mean like shift left, like into the repo. I mean, just like they do it in development and they're counting on that. And their only defense in production is a WAF. That's not a good place to be. So, we've been trying that approach for my whole career. That's, long, 25 years at least in AppSec. And it hasn't worked and it's not going to work. And so what is it going to take to get you to see that building a mountain of vulnerability backlog is not the outcome that we were shooting for? What is it going to take to say, hey, look, the rest of the world, everything like supermarkets and banks and everything, they don't try for 100% security up front. They put a lot of investment into monitoring and response. And we got to balance AppSec out. We just have to.
Yeah, I agree with you. I wrote a piece called The Cybersecurity Delusion Dilemma, where we think that, cybersecurity is the center of the universe. And we fail to realize that the business has competing interests of speed to market and, competitive differentiation and meeting user demand and requests, et cetera. There's so many, revenue generation, et cetera. There's so many competing priorities for cybersecurity. And of course, secure by design, shift left, these are all novel, or not novel, but noble concepts that we should be trying to do. But there's also a pragmatic acceptance that, hey, we are not going to stop all the things. We are not going to catch all the things before production. We need to focus on what is in production, what can be exploited, what's actually being attacked. And this is a much more pragmatic approach, not saying that we shouldn't do those things. Again, defense in depth and, all these things are still relevant. But it's just much more a pragmatic approach to cybersecurity, in my opinion. And, we can keep shooting for perfect and to stop everything before production, or we can acknowledge that we haven't been able to do that. And now we need to focus on what's actually running and what's going to be exploited.
Well, I think we got to acknowledge that irritating everybody else in the organization is not the path to success. You can't irritate your way secure. I used to say you can't hack your way secure, but I think you can't irritate your way secure is a lot more perfect for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, ironically, like when we think about DevSecOps, it was like framed as breaking down silos, right, between devs and sec and so on. But all it did was bolster those silos because people got so frustrated with us throwing these massive spreadsheets at them and saying, you got to fix all the things, like it just bolstered those silos rather than broke them down. So I appreciate you both coming on, Naomi and Jeff. As I said, I've been connected with both of you for quite some time. You always have some great perspectives. I really appreciate the insights that, Contrast is sharing. That's contrastsecurity.com. Check them out. And, they're championing this concept of ADR. I think it is going to be the future of AppSec. So thank you both for jumping on.
Thanks, Chris.
Chris?
Take care.
Bye, everyone.